And so my question to you, Jenny, is how do we empower volunteers? Well, first and foremost, tell us a bit more about Vision for Volunteering. And I'd love for you to explain how we can empower volunteers to maximize their impact and what could we do more to engage them.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. I'm here on behalf of Vision for Volunteering, as Toib said, which is a collaborative, and I think that's in keeping with the conference's themes of community, unity and collective endeavour. Because, as my fellow panellists have said, there feels like this is a significant movement of change in British society. We're seeing social change, whether that's the challenges and opportunities provided by AI and digital, whether that's the environmental crisis and sustainability, safeguard, we could name them, kind of the crisis in young people's mental health and the shadow of COVID and the cost of living. And actually, I could stand here as a colleague saying what I'm hoping to do in my work, but actually it's about us coming together. It's about that collective. It's about us stepping forward into what volunteering could look and feel like in the future. And that's at the heart of the Vision for Volunteering. It's a 10-year ambition to say we're not going to individually, each of our charities, each of us as a volunteer, be buffeted by these changes, but let's come together and find that resonance and step forward into creating the future we want to see. And we've got to make it fun, and we've got to make it impactful, and we've got to try things and do things and possibly fail at things. And actually, this is why I'm really pleased to be on this panel, to hear colleagues and expert views around what are those big changes and how can we come together. So in answer to your question, I think I'd love you all to look up Vision for Volunteering and kind of see how it works with your work, but really importantly, take on those changes in our lives, whether you're a volunteer manager, an individual volunteer, or as an organisation, so that we are collectively meeting the challenges and taking them on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to you, Maaria, your work at the Muslim Youth Helpline is centred on young people. So could you just tell us a little bit about what led you to work with young people and what you feel the biggest factor affecting young people's mental health today is?
I'm going to tackle the second part of the question. So when we look at some of the emotional and social needs of young people, I want to describe what we actually saw happening during the pandemic and then also what was happening post-pandemic. So during the pandemic, we saw this huge increase in inquiries coming into the helpline. This is for many reasons. Firstly, there was an increase because there was a lack of services for those people that actually needed services, that were on lists. But we also saw a brand new bunch of people who had never needed services before, who never needed to protect their mental health and were in a situation where they needed to talk to someone or who were experiencing a lot of stresses in their life. And then we also saw a lot of young people who were using our service as more of a buffer service. So actually, during the first year of the pandemic, MYH supported 88 young people who were on CAMS and counselling waiting lists. We also saw a rise in repeat callers, so people who became so reliant on our helpline because what they were going through was so debilitating that they needed to get support every day. And actually, as a helpline, we only provide emotional support, so this was very difficult for our staff because they were dealing with very difficult, intense cases that we'd never done before. So when we look at some of the primary concerns that came into the helpline during the pandemic, they related to religious advice. We had family issues, faith and spirituality, relationships, financial support, depression and anxiety. And we also saw a rise in cases that we needed to support because there were safeguarding cases. But actually, when we look at outside of the pandemic, what is happening for young people? They are struggling with financial support. There is a lot of stress and being overwhelmed, but also managing relationships. So generally, young people's issues reflect whatever is happening in the UK. So if we see a huge rise in mental health concerns, that will also be reflected in the, on the helpline. But what is very different is their experience with services. So a lot of young people may use mainstream support services, but actually what they find is that the mainstream support services don't acknowledge their faith, don't acknowledge their cultural background, and for the young person, they feel like they're not getting that holistic support. Some other things that are really hard for the young person, especially for young Muslims, is the barriers to social mobility. Now, we know that there are issues around, there are issues around socio-demographic, like your faith and your ethnicity and your age really come into it. And actually, there was a 2017 report on social mobility, and it found that Muslims were the most disadvantaged faith group in the UK labour market. And these outcomes weren't related to their ethnicity, actually. These studies show that Muslims experienced disadvantage above their ethnic penalty in the labour market, with 50% of Muslim households considered to be in poverty, and compared to actually less than 20% of the overall population. But what was striking about this study was that a lot of young people from certain ethnic backgrounds surpassed their educational expectations placed on them, but that this didn't reflect in the labour market. So what is going on? We have young Muslims who are doing so well in school, but it's not being translated into the labour market or their labour market successes. And actually, a lot of young people themselves identified that there were cultural barriers in their communities, there is discrimination in the education system, in the labour market, and these are obstacles that stand in their way. So there is so much that we actually need to do to support young people, but also dismantle these barriers. But these are time sensitive. And I say they're time sensitive because in 2020 we saw COVID's impact on our communities and how disproportionately it impacted others. So if we don't tackle these issues when it comes to education, inequalities in education and in health, we're really going to see that impact on our communities, but also in our young people. The pandemic made pre-existing health inequalities worse and disproportionately impacted the health of others and people from minoritized groups. Muslims felt left behind. So we know that there are barriers to social mobility. We know that there are diverse and they exist for Muslims regardless of ethnicity. And we know that there are concerns that good educational attainment does not translate into the job market opportunities for young people. And young people, they feel the existence of these barriers. Many young people calling the helpline are taking on bigger caring responsibilities of the family, of younger siblings, and there is a stress from this too. So understanding this data really is important because only then can we fill in the gaps about what is important to enhance and support our young people and their success in their mental health, but also in education and in the job market. And this is something that we do at MYH. We really look at all the primary concerns that are coming into the helpline, and then we look at all the support that we can give, all the training that we can give to our staff to support these young people, but also all the signposting organisations that need to be available so that young people can succeed. Thank you.
No, thank you. So I want to go back to the poll and the theme of the poll that we had as we were getting mic'd up. And the theme of the poll was, where should charity funds be spent in the UK versus abroad? And so we know that the UK, the British Muslim community is a generous community. The oft-quoted figure is that we spend £500 million on charity a year in the UK. And we know that Zakat is a subset of that charitable giving. And so the question first is to you, Dr. Hanif, around people grappling with where they should be spending their charitable funds, UK versus abroad. Where is the need greatest? And is there, are they mutually exclusive? And then if we can go on that same theme, to you, Nazia, on sustainability. Do you see essentially cost of living as a barrier to sustainable living, and any experiences you have through your organisation for people just saying, look, I would love to be able to do X, Y, and Z, I just can't afford to? Any themes around that, please?
Sure. Thank you very much. If I can just start again from the vantage point of the organisation that I represent. The National Zakat Foundation, I said we specialise in distributing zakat within the United Kingdom. What I'd like to start off by saying is why distributing within the United Kingdom? This is not merely a strategic decision, it's a faith-driven decision. And that's because all of the classical schools of Islamic law held that zakat ideally is spent in the place where you live. They disagreed whether it's a farad or a sunnah, obligatory or recommended, but they agreed that there's something about locality that's tied to the theme of zakat. And why is that? It's because they explain that your neighbor in faith, again, zakat is given to Muslims to strengthen the notion of faith community. Your neighbors in faith have a special right on you. And the duty of zakat is meant to create within each of us a concern to know who are our neighbors and what are their needs and what are their concerns and how do we build strong communities. So building strong communities is a pillar of our faith. It's not an option, it's not a strategic decision. It's something we cannot not do. Because these are the people we share our roads with, we share the streets with, and they're struggling, and we might not be, and we have a tie. And it's that tie that the classical rules of zakat are really emphasizing. And why is this so important? Because of all the themes we've been hearing, whether it's mental health and homelessness or poverty, the struggle here is very real, and we have to solve that. Because that's what gives us a strong base to address other questions, other more strategic questions for our future here and for people we're concerned with and related with, our ummah, overseas. So all I'll say is spending here, developing strong community structures here, and again, the notion of local zakat is not about one institution does everything and we sit at home. It's about our own duty to our neighbors, which really touches into a vision which is very much volunteer-driven. How can we enable each other to fulfill our duties to our neighbors? And at a time of all these crumbling structures around us, it's community that we have to rely upon. So there's something in our rules and our teaching of zakat which sheds a light of a community-driven future, and that's a future I'm committed to build here within the United Kingdom, or to contribute to. But something about where, is it all here, not all here, as the question was, this I don't think needs to be an either-or question. I think all we have to think about is we have a series of ties. Our Prophet, God bless him and give him peace, on the theme of balance, he brought to us the sanctity of every tie. Tie of blood, tie of neighbor, tie of faith. So all we have to do is fulfill the rights of peoples we have ties to. There's global ties, there's local ties, there's neighborly ties. But all I would say is we cannot forget the tie of people who are around us. There's such an oblivion in our Muslim community, this notion that no one's ever in need, which we've been dealing with for years. There's no one in need, it's a welfare state. And I've got really sad stories of UK citizens who are sleeping on the floor, universal credits all being spent on pre-arranged bills. People are really struggling. And so that's all I'll say. It's not either or. It's not all here and not all overseas. It's a balance of rights. And as long as we collaborate in balancing our rights, we can do a lot here and overseas. And I just want to thank in this moment as well a lot of our international partners like Islamic Relief, Muslim Aid, who have taken a part of their budget of zakat for UK distribution, which we distribute on their behalf. And there are ways we can collaborate all of our strengths to see to all of our rights. It's not either or, it's working together. Thank you.
I'm a really big believer in doing things locally, and I have been for a number of years. So the organisation that I run, we're mainly based in East London, and it's an area that I grew up in and that I love to be in. And so I really want to see the change in that community before I broaden out to other parts of London or other parts of the UK. I think what we're talking about today is how all injustices are linked together, and the injustices, social injustices are linked to environmental ones as well. If you think about a young person living in a council estate who's working multiple jobs, faces Islamophobia, racism, and so on, naturally caring about the environment won't be at the top of their priority list. And so this is why there's an immense amount of privilege attached to caring about the environment. We see white middle class people dominate the environmental scene because their priorities are completely different. I think it's incredibly important to do projects in the UK and abroad. I don't think it's an and or as well. And so the community projects that we do are the community gardens that we have in East London, which bring people together, which create conversations. But we also talk about how upset we are about what's happening in our home countries, in Bangladesh and Pakistan and so on. And I think when we empower communities in this country and young people here, I think you're equipped with the skills to think about how can we now replicate certain projects that we've done here over in other countries as well.
Thank you very much. And you touched upon a key word, Sohail, on collaboration. And for me, the question is, how do we collaborate to maximize impact? And I'd love to hear from you, Jenny, thinking back to the list of organizations you're collaborating with through Vision for Volunteering and bringing them together. What can we learn from your experiences doing that, generally either through your work with Sport England or Vision for Volunteering? And how do you collaborate effectively to maximize impact across organizations?
Thank you. And that's quite a question, and I'm definitely hearing from what Dr. Hanif has said about connections to community, and Nazia said around building from your locality, but also having that connection out. I think as we all sit here possibly representing different organisations, collaboration is a really important thing, but it's also a really hard thing. There's a bit of a joke in Sport England that collaboration is a contact sport, because actually it is hard sometimes to put aside what you're bringing to the room to listen and actually really hear what's happening and what's happening in our communities, and then start to build on those shared principles of collective endeavour and actually think, you know, Sport England is in a very privileged position to be a funder. We invest lottery and government funding into community activities. So that could be, you know, Saturday morning Little League for kids, or Tuesday night netball, or yoga, or badminton, or hula hooping, or whatever it is that brings a community together, because actually sport and physical activity isn't the end point. That collaboration is about healthy and connected communities. And actually, how does an organisation develop those skills to collaborate fully? And I'm preaching the converted. You guys would be excellent at this, because it's about having those difficult conversations. It's about being honest about where you're coming from and what your objectives are, and finding those shared objectives. So for Sport England, we invest heavily in place and local communities, because actually the sport is not the end point. It's about helping kids get back into school. It's about helping older adults with dementia stay active. It's about keeping people and connected into their community and far more likely to be happier and healthier. It's about working with colleagues in the Muslim community to find out what it is that helps those families and how sport or physical activity can play a part. So I'm just going to leave you with kind of Vision for Volunteering has set out kind of 5 themes. Awareness and appreciation that volunteering has a real impact and a real benefit. But power is their second theme. How do we change up things? Because actually the power structures sometimes just aren't working. We've talked about these big macro changes, and how do we change that up? Collaboration is another one. Experimentation, because actually we need to try and fail in order to find the right way through. And then really importantly, it's equity and inclusion. How do we make sure that when we're collaborating, we're not taking preconceived ideas about who's right, who's wrong, who's strongest, who's biggest, but actually how do we generally work together? And I think the challenges that we've heard and seen on this panel are absolutely within our collective grasp. We can change up these things for our communities.
Thank you. And reflecting on what I heard you say, power structures really stuck in my mind, because many young people feel like they're excluded from power structures and that life happens to them. And so, Maaria, I would love to hear from you what we can do to support young people and Muslim youth, in your view, of course.
Thank you. Oh, great, it works this time. We've heard so much about, on this panel, about building strong communities, giving hope, developing strong structures, and also the idea of where do we invest? But we invest where the need is, and the need is in our young people, and especially young Muslims who feel the real impact of some of the biggest issues that we've heard on this panel today. And it's so interesting, because the first thing that comes to my mind is to give locally. It is to invest in services where young people are. It's in spaces where they are, where they're volunteering, where they exist, but also to give them opportunities to upskill. And we've touched on some of those issues around job market, the labour market successes, school, education attainment, but it's also to create opportunities for them to work in these spaces, to give them a voice when it comes to decision making, because essentially they are the ones that will be the future generations of the Muslims in this UK. It's also to encourage good practice where young people are in those spaces that they're engaging in. Things like safeguarding, make sure that we are safeguarding properly, and we are voicing our concerns in the right channels where young people exist. And lastly, I'd say be empathetic. Be empathetic to some of the struggles that they're going through, because a lot of times they may not be the struggles that we've experienced, but we need to be very understanding so that we can really create better structures for them to excel.
Can I add to it? I think just to add to Maria's points, I think giving young people ownership of projects is something that's really important. Often they're kind of volunteering for things and they don't know the objectives or the goals, or they're not asked how they want things to look like. So for example, the gardening project that we ran, we made sure to ask the young people, how do you want the space to look and feel? What kind of plants do you want us to buy? And so that really makes them feel like, you know, this is my project, not just a project that they've got funding for. So I think that's a really important aspect as well, to ensure that we kind of keep volunteers continuing to come to projects as well.
Thank you. And we are about to go to Q&A. Before we do so, one question for you all, which is quite a heavy topic we've discussed today, and it's been laden with discussion on all of the barriers and all of the challenges that exist. But I'd love to know, what gives you hope? What excites you? So if we start with you, Doctor, then we'll go to you, Jenny, then we'll go to you, Maaria, and then we'll go to you, Nazia.
Thank you very much. So speaking from the point of view of, again, UK Zakat, what gives hope is the fact that I really think it's a very consequential project whose time has come. I think there are communities all over this country who are really thinking hard now how to use their obligatory Zakat to really develop networks of support, which people can access through mosques, through community centers. And our goal at National Zakat Foundation is to collaborate, empower, and support these networks. The future that we feel is very much possible is a future where, again, speaking from the angle of Zakat, first of all, where every single Muslim in the UK can feel proud that they belong to a network of support. And that feeling is at the foundation of building a really strong faith community. And the message of Zakat is not an exclusivist message. It's not that Muslims versus. Rather, it's about we talk about charity starting at home. The Muslim community is often the most impoverished community in the United Kingdom. A strong, proud, connected and confident community will only be a force of good for our wider communities that we are working within the United Kingdom. And there are some very powerful collaborative projects which we can do, like NZF. We supported C4WS, which is a Christian homeless project. We covered the cost of Muslim residents, so their funding could go further. So again, it's not about an exclusivist vision, it's a specialist vision. But a strong faith community is what I think will be one of the strongest assets we can leave behind for our descendants and for the people of these British Isles. And I think it's a very doable vision. It's the vision coming right out of the sacred law of our Prophet, and I think it will really leave its mark on these British Isles.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am an eternal optimist, and I know that we have all the solutions to all of the challenges, current and in the future, within ourselves, and it's about coming together. And actually, evidence shows that when you volunteer and you give your time, you are far more likely to meet different people, connect to different people, increase empathy, increase understanding, skills, make friends, reduce loneliness. So, you know, that in itself, it is magic. That's why I'm so passionate about it. But absolutely, the connected community that Dr. Hanif talks about, I believe that's exactly it, is bringing people together.
The question is, what makes you hopeful and excited?
Before I ask what the question, Jenny will be really impressed with this answer, because our volunteers and our team, that's a huge plug, sorry, but recently we reintroduced volunteers onto the helpline, and these are people who give up their time, and also not just that, but volunteer on a helpline that's very, very difficult to volunteer on. They take really intense calls. There's a lot of training to go into just becoming a volunteer on the helpline, but also the distressing calls that they take and handle so well. And apart from that work that they do on the helpline, they create plans for young people who are repeat callers and need additional support. So they'll take time away from their work and they'll engage with these young people, and they'll make sure that they are signposted correctly and referred to the right support services. And the way that they speak about these young people, they've completely invested in making sure that this young person gets the right support and is well and healthy and feels like they have a home on the helpline. And I mean, that's amazing. So it's definitely the people that volunteer, the people that give their time, that gives me hope. But you know, we're in the right hands, but also that people have such big hearts to want to give. And especially because a lot of these young people who are on our helpline, who are volunteering, have lived experiences. So they are grappling with their own concerns, but yet they spend so many hours of their time on the helpline supporting young people.
Thank you. And whilst Nazia has an extra 3 seconds to think of her answer, we only have time for one round of questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please have them ready, because we'll go to you straight after Nazia.
One hadith that I love is where the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, said, if the day of resurrection had come established upon one of you and you had in your hand a sapling, let them plant it. To me, this hadith shows that we should always do good, even when we know we won't benefit from it. We plant that seed knowing we will never live to see it grow, and yet we're still encouraged to do that action. And it also shows that it's never too late to take action, to make a change. Amidst the uncertainty and chaos of the world, sometimes it feels like there's no point in doing anything. But this hadith really signifies hope and the importance of doing everything till the very last day of our lives.
Thank you very much. So